Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. How's my audio on that one? Clean?
A bit fadey. I think it just takes a touch to stabilize, like 10 or so seconds
Okay.
ish.
I'll give it a bit of a delay next time. See
We're
if I
good
can.
now.
It might also be with the new
No.
mic. No? Okay. Anyway, besides the point. While I'm trying to figure out my audio and my issues here on my end, what you should be doing is hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe, and also the notification bell. That way you get a little email every day when we go live, which is, helpful for those that don't know that we go live every day, I guess. Today, we have a very, I guess, special topic because I think it affects a lot of people in our community. I think in men in general, I think we suffer from this quite regularly, and I think it's something that we need to get into. So we're going to get into that in a second, but I do want to preface this a little bit in none of us are doctors. Steve's pretty close, but not quite. But none of us are doctors, so anything we do say, anything we do come up with, all of these tools or stuff that we talk about is going to be from our own experience and how it affects us and how we have adapted it for our lives. So take that. If you are experiencing any sort of breakdown or you're having really difficulty getting really triggered about what we're talking about, bounce. Go talk to a doc, go talk to a friend, go talk to somebody, engage the issue directly, and then you can always come back. But don't try and fight it to stay involved in the conversation. This is recorded, so you can watch it anytime you would like. Any other prefaces or statements that you think we need to hit before we dive into this?
That was pretty solid.
I would just say this, speaking of doctors, there's probably a number of doctors out there that suffer more imposter syndrome than I do. And I suffer from imposter syndrome. And so being a doctor doesn't make you immune to imposter syndrome. But ironically, it may make you more susceptible to imposter syndrome. So for when we're using the term doctor, you are probably referring to a psychiatrist or a therapist or some such thing, a medical professional who has some deep background in mental health, we'll call it. But irrespective of doctors, there's enough content here between the six of us that we can probably easily talk about imposter syndrome with enough meat and potatoes that it should be a good combo today.
Yeah. I imagine every day so far this month, we're just going to scratch the surface of this, and there's going to be probably days worth of information that we could get into, but we'll carry it on. So we do have, we're going to go into imposter syndrome for sure today. I'm going to give a brief definition of it, and then we can discuss it from our perspectives and go from there. Right off the bat, let me just switch my camera here. Boom. So, imposter syndrome, also known as imposter phenomenon or imposterism, is a psychological condition in which people doubt their skills, talents, or accomplishments and have a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as frauds. Despite external evidence of their competence, those experiencing this phenomenon do not believe they deserve their success or luck. Imposter syndrome disproportionately affects high-achieving people who find it difficult to accept their accomplishments and question whether they're deserving of accolades. Yeah, so that is the start of it. One of the things I heard very early on about imposter syndrome, because I've been dealing with it for many, many years, was it means you're in the right place. If you are feeling imposter syndrome, it means that you are pushing yourself out of your boundaries to a point that you are unsure of your capabilities to begin with, and that is where you should be. But that was just an initial preface on that. Any initial thoughts from the panel?
Well, it can mean that. I mean, you say that like it does mean it, but it can mean that.
It can. You're right. Absolutely.
That's not what it does mean.
Thank you for the correction.
Yeah, it can work in all kinds of ways, of course. I'll start with this, that I do suffer from imposter syndrome. So I didn't know I had imposter syndrome until someone said, dude, you got a bit of imposter syndrome. I was like, what's that? because I wasn't all dialed into all the fun new words of the day, all of the phrases that we're now being told we are. And so I didn't know I was imposterish, but I am, for sure I am. And I've got a strong streak of imposter syndrome in me. And this is something that I've come to observe since I was told that I have it strongly. I considered all of my friends from tier one. And as I considered all of them, and I've talked to them about this a little bit to some degree, we all, not all, we all, a lot of us demonstrated the symptoms of imposter syndrome to some degree or another. And I'm not going to say 100% or 97%. I'll just say a strong correlation to imposter syndrome within tier one roles. And so I found that to be the case in any high performing, we'll call it society or sub society. Taking 24-hour solo mountain bike racers as an example at the world championship level, those high performing athletes typically struggle with the sense of themselves as an imposter or not. So high flyers or high performers or people who are strongly in the mix do suffer from imposterism. And what I had to do for myself, and I struggle with it today. I struggle right now in front of this microphone to say the things that I say because I don't feel like I belong here. I feel like someone else should be here instead of me because everyone can do a better job than I can in front of a microphone because I don't belong here. So, what I have to tell myself when it comes to imposter syndrome is earn my seat, earn my place every day, earn my spot at the table every day. That's what I used to tell myself in tier one. Once you're there, that's just the introduction to the party. But once you're at the party, you got to earn your spot every day at the party. And so that's how I treat my life is I doubt myself a fair bit, but I earn my spot a fair bit.
I like that, Jeff.
Yeah, I was going to build on that. I kind of like Shaun. It wasn't until this, and then I looked up. I went to like the good old internet, and I found on like Psychology Today had a really good article. I'm looking down at it. That's why I look like I'm not paying attention. And it talked about a lot of it comes, just like Shaun was saying, a lot of it comes from people that are perfectionists, and that will come with your tier one. Like a lot of people that have our backgrounds. Anybody, I would say a lot of guys like us. I know that sounds like pretty all-encompassing cliche, but where there's smoke, there's fire. But I think I found it very interesting that it's an ironic duality is we become our own worst critic, which is what's driven us to where we are. Guys like us drive us to where we are because we are perfectionists. But then for me, kind of like Shaun, I was reading this and I was like, that's not me. That's not me. And I would actually take it back and say, this is 100% something I would say I am dealing with. I guess the only thing I don't share is there's a lot of this common diagnoses talk about how you're scared of being found out. So there's always like this, some of the definitions on like various journals and stuff have like that part of it, like you're scared of being found out, which sounds like almost like a malicious imposter. Whereas I would say I just feel like almost a self-imposed imposter, kind of like Shaun was saying, is we're such high-level perfectionists that we set ourselves up for great success. But then I would say also left unchecked, that's where we get that imposter syndrome, where we feel like we are never good enough. And then that's where, this is easier said than done. I'm going to read it. It talks about like reflecting on your achievements, reflecting on the things you've accomplished. Where guys like us, or at least myself, I don't want to speak for everybody, I'm the worst at that. I'm like, those things were good enough. I don't want to talk about those because that isn't success for me. I'm still striving for that. And I really found a very interesting nuance with the perfectionism aspect of that fuels the imposter syndrome.
I like that. Chad, Steve, Rob, any thoughts? What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, I always go back to the average Joe stuff. I always love when you hear guys, like Jeff and Shaun, these tier one guys, coming out and expressing that they fight and they struggle with this stuff too, right? And that's what I've always kind of looked at is these guys have led on the battlefield. Now they're leading off the battlefield as well, right? With earning the seat at the table, still talking that talk, still driving everything forward. And so the average Joe guys like me that we failed them thousands of times over and over and over, right? You hear it from these top tier guys. You're like, okay, like I get it, man. They're discussing some of this stuff too that affects them on their daily life. And these guys are super high performers. So if I can get out of the way of my own stuff, what's the limitations or how far can I push myself as an individual? So I think everybody struggles with it. But again, you hear these guys out there like, the David Goggins and stuff as well that are really expressing this stuff at a high level. And it's really waking up kind of, if you want to, your average Joes like myself to say, no, there's another level to life and you don't need to deal with this stuff. So, I appreciate the stuff that you guys are doing here with the collective and bringing on different personalities and people from different, from USA to Canada all over just talking about this stuff. So it's kind of nice to hear guys, from all levels and walks of life saying, hey, we all struggle in some kind of format, but let's collectively get together and talk about this stuff so it's not such a pain in everyone's rear.
100%. Rob?
Yeah, I guess for me, yeah. So I'll throw my hat in the ring as the complete opposite of most of this panel. I don't come from a pedigree, never served, wasn't law enforcement. I just worked corporate security and cybersecurity, right? And for me, it's my issues with imposter syndrome really weren't driven by like this A-type personality. To be honest, I didn't have an A-type personality until later in life, and that's actually the key to my experience with this effect. For a big portion of my life, this is where I'll agree with you, Chance, on your statement. In the right place, maybe not so much. I won't agree with that because it could be any place. I just considered that you have to care about what you're doing, whether it's the right place and the right application of what you actually have to care. For a very long time, I didn't. You know what I mean? So like there wasn't a day in that period of my life in my 20s where I woke up going, oh man, am I in the right place? That was the reason why I was in a bad place, is because I didn't care. I didn't ask those questions of myself. Now, the other portion of that is that my imposter syndrome really wasn't an idea that, oh, I'm not performing well enough. It goes back to some, long sort of fermenting childhood issues with being told like you're never going to be good enough. So then, you get to this place where you're awesome to some degree, or hopefully you do, right? But there's still that little voice going, yeah, but you're still not good enough. So that's where the questions came from. It wasn't really the comparison between me and other people, although that is a little bit of an effect that gets mixed in there. It was mostly going through this different transition of life from a period where I didn't give a crap about what I was doing or my sort of gifts to the world per se, and then this little childhood voice going like, yeah, you're not in the same place you were, but you're still trash, right? So like it's a conflict between those two personalities, I guess.
I like that. Steve, you got some thoughts?
Great stuff, guys. Really thoughtful. Hard to follow up, but I was pretty interested. I like you said, Shaun, you had a great point. You felt like an imposter before you knew what this was. Being a medic or like a close specialist at Dwyer Hill, as soon as you got there, it didn't matter how trained you were as a medic, how many lives you've saved, how many bandages you put on. You weren't an assaulter. You were always a specialist. It didn't matter how hard you trained or what you did or how many times you jumped out of an airplane. You always felt like a level 2 specialist, and you have to be confident in the job you're doing to get past that. But the other thing is, I think it's fascinating how you can take one of the most important attributes for any good person, which is humility, and the fine line between imposter syndrome and humility it's like razor thin between what's healthy,
razor thin,
and humble, and then what is unhealthy.
Yeah, that it is a great point, and it's very difficult to find that line. I do have just a couple comments I want to hit here because it's very important. First off, winter storm, belated morning, everyone. Dr. C is in the house. Always good to see you. Says our inner critic and our inner dialogue is important to understand where it came from and then challenge those maladaptive beliefs, which I think is a key part in this. Is that most of the thought patterns that we come up with, or at least from my experience in terms of imposter syndrome, most of the stuff I came up with was through external comparison. It wasn't so much that I was looking at where I had come from and where I was. It was now, but I'm never going to be that guy. Right. And so by the fact that I can't be that guy, I must not be correct where I am right now because I'm standing beside him. So even like I look at this panel and I look at, tier one, Green Berets, the Rangers, successful businessmen, like, and I'm sitting here going, but I was only a combat engineer. Right. And that external comparison immediately lays into my, my sense of imposter syndrome. And the thing that has at least helped me was challenging those maladaptive beliefs in that you are all choosing to be here, right? I'm not tricking you all into, ha, I've got you on my show, sneaky me, right?
There's a way to get out of this,
right?
But and I got sucked in.
You did. I tricked you all. But no, the key is that other people have choices too, right? It's not just about me tricking you into it and it's all me doing, maladaptive things. No, we're all sitting here having a conversation and we're all here for our own benefit and for the benefit of those around us. And so that's what really helped me was challenging those maladaptive beliefs. I found that was really important.
Yeah, this one for me, man. Sorry, I was thinking about this like, the last couple of days kind of deal. And I figured it would be part of the later conversation, but Dr. C's hitting right on the head. Like this was the life-changing moment for me in that feeling. Okay. Like that conversation in our head isn't logical. Right. And the proof is in that sort of process that Dr. C highlighted. Like, so for me, right. Like, is it that everybody's such a good detective? Like everybody around me is such a good detective that they're going to find the secret that I've been hiding from everybody. Okay. But at the same time, they're that big of an idiot that they let me still have my job or hang out with them or whatever. But the two things cannot be mutually inclusive, in a logical fashion. Yet our brain tries to spin it that way. And that's like that in that moment, you're because you're not thinking logically, those two things don't exist. All you focus on is this. Everyone's such a better performer, better at their job title. They're all looking for all this evidence behind my back to prove that I'm not who I am kind of deal. Or is it that like, oh, these people also have a choice, right? They're choosing to keep me hired. They're choosing to call me their best friend. They're choosing to depend on me. What is the real truth, right? And I had to learn in those moments of thinking that, oh, I'm worthless or whatever. Well, what am I saying? Am I saying that I'm worthless? Or am I also saying that this entire group of strangers is also worthless? And what's more probable, right? In that moment.
I like that. Anybody else got any thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to build on that. He mentioned something earlier when you first started talking about external factors, and there's something I found fascinating when it came to kind of whenever I just reference my experience, it's not like I think I'm like, oh, if you didn't do what I did, you don't have a place at the table, to use Shaun's phrase. But for me, it was more, I just use that as a reference point because that's just what I know. And it's very interesting in those worlds where those were in a vacuum. And I think that is what contained that perfectionism from ever transcending into this imposter syndrome, at least for me. And this sounds like old man, hating on the internet and social media, but we get out. For me, the big thing I'm realizing, and I think a lot of people need to become self-aware, is what are we comparing ourselves to? Because all we are is bombarded by quote unquote success stories. Whereas when I was in my little isolated Green Beret 18 Delta world, my reference point were my peers. I didn't get on the internet and look at some photoshopped fit ripped guy ranger competition dude. I had no reference point to screw my level of perfectionism up to a point where it was diluted. And living in that vacuum, I think, is where that fine line between perfectionism and I can't remember who mentioned being humble. And that vacuum, now that we're all out in the real world, at least for like, this is the veteran's perspective for me, that's what screwed me up, is because now my reference point isn't this isolated bubble of tier 1 or tier 2. Those were my left and right limits. Now the whole world's out there. So now us perfectionists don't really know our barometer anymore as far as like, what's our reference point? What am I looking at? Am I looking at this successful businessman that owns a supplement company? Oh God, okay, now I'm looking over here. when in reality, those things are kind of sometimes probably psychologically you get bombarded with those quote unquote successful people. That is going to take the perfectionism people like us that were perfect in our little vacuums, and it's going to use that. It now becomes our greatest strength and becomes our worst weakness. And I think that's a big thing, at least for me, experiencing imposter syndrome is perspective. Who am I using as my barometer? Is it some photoshopped life experience that I truly don't know what's going on behind the scenes of that person's life? Or am I using a fellow person that's in the same life circumstance? And I think when we are in our worlds, whether it was EMS or LEO or whatever it is, that should be your bubble. Like, not a bubble in an ignorant sense, but as far as a reference point, I think we're too connected in the world to the point where we kind of lose that perspective of what is a true reference point that we should actually hold ourselves up to a standard when we truly don't know what that standard is. I knew the standard. I had to do this to be an 18 Delta. Boom, done. Achieve that perfectionism. Sweet. But now we have the whole world to look at. And now it's on us to maintain that level of realistic expectations, which is a phrase I hate.
I like that. You're talking about layering a whole pile of white noise onto a life that had a careful, calculated trajectory. Yeah. And so and that's tough, man, when you get out of a velocity that is a laser beam. Once you start looking at those extreme lefts and rights of the world that we're not familiar with, we'll call it the supplement king, the whatever, the laundry guy, whatever, all of the stuff that's out there, all the white noise, which is exactly what it is. Yeah. It's our job to, and I'm not speaking to you, Jeff, I'm speaking to the entire internet. It's our job to increase the focal range of that laser beam so that we're capturing enough left and right bandwidth of the areas that we want to pursue, because we can't pursue the world. Yeah, it's too much white noise. There's too much static out there. But we do know that we can pursue anything that we put our mind to, as long as we keep it under a tight enough focal beam that we can put crosshairs on it and go get it.
You can't try to be a perfectionist at everything you witness anymore.
That's right.
That's not the thing. Whereas where we came from, you could be a perfectionist on a certain thing because that's all you had. And I love that's a perfect way to say it, Shaun, is like that laser focus is we hit a dance ball now, or a disco ball with our laser in it. It's all over the place.
Yeah, that's right. And so the idea being that if you're looking to work with your imposter syndrome, there's ways to do that. But before we talk about ways to work with the imposter syndrome, I'd just like to propose this. Before I jumped into this podcast, I was on my own live IG potty, and I was talking a little bit about imposter syndrome, knowing that we were going to be jumping into this conversation this morning. So I just did a little bit of preface for the folks that follow me over there. And so as I was reading out some things, some stuff that I'd put together with the Chat GPT 4.0 this morning, there was a phrase there, or a sentence there more correctly, that stated this. And I'm going to loosely paraphrase it. When you're trying to overcome imposter syndrome, you can ... And then it goes on with all of the things you can do. And I read that and I thought, what? What do you mean overcome? I'm not trying to overcome it, bro. I don't need to overcome it. What I am doing with it is using it as a freaking scalpel. I'm using it as a tool to my benefit. I know that I am it, so I might as well use it. And it's taken me a while to learn how to use the quote-unquote flaw of being an imposter syndrome within my own little world. I have used it now as a tool, now that I know how to use it properly, to engage in life, so that, not that it's causing me to see more success, it's causing me to feel more at ease with my process. So I'm not looking to overcome it. I'm looking to use it. And I hope that makes sense.
Makes sense, yeah. Chad,
you're reframing, right?
Yeah, could I weigh in on that?
Reframing is a cool word that is an entire life. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So the reframing word gets thrown out like super casually. So you're reframing the sentence. Yes, I am. But that reframing is a massive trajectory shift, not just a simple little tweak. You know what I mean?
It's in how you're applying it, right? Like, yeah, the word reframing, it's the new psych sort of term
It is.
for like
Yeah.
in social
That's
work
why
and
I'm
all that,
pushing
right?
back.
Yeah, no, dude, good pushback, right? Because you said the important part. Like, we can change how we look at a certain idea, but if we don't apply it, then what's the word changed for, right? Like, it's still a obstacle to overcome for you if you don't actually do something about it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Steve?
Yeah, I was like looking at this whole just this imposter thing in general. I kind of looked at it and reading about it and just thinking about it. I like to embrace my imposter syndrome because when I don't feel adequate enough, that drives me to work harder. That drives me to train harder. If I have a bad day on the range, or even with the fire department, if we have a call that goes kind of a way we didn't like it, that just makes me want to be better. I kind of like the idea of always wanting to improve. I'm never comfortable with my capability. I want to be better. Um, and that's kind of helped to get where I am in life. It's not healthy sometimes, but a lot of times it's what drives you to move forward. And one of the things that I thought was very weird just in the research I was doing, but I don't know if you gentlemen came across it, that constructive criticism was something that people with imposter syndrome are unable to handle. And I actually felt that was the exact opposite,
That's the opposite.
because constructive criticism is also what helps you to drive to be better. If you want to be better, you're always looking for constructive criticism. I don't like doing AARs that have positive points. Tell me what I did wrong and we'll fix those.
Dude, are you me? You're in my brain right now.
Basically. Chad, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I can break it down. I mean, just for me with, the stuff we've talked about before, but, looking at, all you jiu-jitsu guys, right? Like, you guys you're always rolling, and it's something I want to get back into, but then I've got to realize, like, I'm not there right now at that point. I've got other things going on, launching the business, I'm learning how to play guitar because it's something I've always wanted to do. I'm learning to be a better golfer. So it's like, I've got to look at things in those contexts, like the jiu-jitsu thing is something I want to do, but I'm trying to master all these other things. So I'm learning to kind of piece things together and not throw everything on the plate, not compare the self to everybody else as we've talked about, but using, again, that imposter syndrome to drive forward more positivity and more growth as who I am as a human being, and just being a good dad, father, human all around. So
I like that. I think the one of the things that I at least catching in my head here is the fact that this seems to be, and it happens to me a lot when I'm doing something that I'm maybe unsure of. But if I'm doing something that I really enjoy, like jujitsu, I'm seeking out that constructive criticism, right? when I'm doing something that I'm like invested in and I want to be better, and that is like my drive is to be awesome at this, I don't really have issues with imposter syndrome. I know that, like, okay, yeah, I'm not very good. Let's get better. And you can use it to drive yourself forward with that. And I noticed, at least again for me, was the fact that when I was doing something that I wasn't, I can't say enjoying, but maybe over invested in, right? That I should be better. I'm not actually seeing what is happening right now. I'm looking 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, a year into the future rather than where I'm at right now. And I think that was a struggle for me for quite a while. Was, when I first started getting into advocacy, I'll put it that way, right after I got out of the Army, and I was trying to figure out how to do it better for the veteran community, and I was diving into everything I possibly could. I'm going to help here, I'm going to help here, I'm going to help here. And the imposter syndrome started to kick in, because I was overfilling my plate, as you said, Chad. But on top of that, I was engaging in things less out of desire to be better in those things, but as a desire just to be involved, if that makes sense.
Well, you set yourself up for imposter failure.
Yes.
Or you set yourself up to be an imposter because
Yes.
you were jumping into all kinds of things that you had no experience in per se. We'll say that you weren't a subject matter expert.
For sure.
And so you're entering in trying to be an SME, but not an SME. And that's challenging. And so now, to use your example as the BJJ scenario, So you just got your purple belt and you've just recently started instructing. And so you're pursuing your excellence in BJJ and you're excited about it and then that all that good stuff. And that's great. And you might not be experiencing too much imposter syndrome right now because you're kind of new to the game. And I'm saying that carefully because I'm going to contextualize that against a guy who has been in the game and is now a black belt in BJJ and runs a club as the head instructor. And he's got all the weight of the world in his own mind on his shoulders. And he feels like he doesn't deserve to be there. He feels like he doesn't know how to teach. He feels like, why are students even showing up? Which is a very different situation than the one that, Chance Burrows is in, as the example.
For sure.
And so the imposter syndrome, using the BJJ mats as the example, may show up or it may not show up, depending on what your role is on the mats, how much quote unquote weight of the world you're carrying on your shoulders. But I think most important of all, it's the stressor of, are you responsible just for you or are you responsible for more than just you? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great point. You guys got any thoughts on that?
I guess I'll just touch on the comment that was made about constructive criticism because I think it's sort of dead on, and I can use my particular circumstance and how it affected me. So again, I'm going to go back to that point. Like I had a lot of self-esteem, self-confidence issues, right? That's the moment in time of my life where like constructive criticism sucked because it wasn't from a place where like, hey, Rob's trying to actually become the best he can be on this trajectory of the Dunning-Kruger curve. You know what I mean? Where like I knew I didn't know anything and I wanted to cheat. I wanted to use the old game genie, and that is, hey, if you're experienced, you tell me what I'm doing wrong because I obviously don't have enough experience to know that, and thus, growing in whatever craft. The moment I hit a point in time in my life where I had the emotional and intellectual maturity to have a different perspective on that entire sort of learning, I guess, system, right? Like fall on your face, learn something new, grow a little bit, fall on your face again, and have people around there to tell you from a good place, that constructive criticism, what you did wrong, how to make it better next time. Until that happened, any criticism, but especially for some reason, especially constructive criticism, because it was like this nice form of criticism that you couldn't like turn back on the other person and say, hey, you're just a jerk. You know what I mean? Like it was actually someone legitimately trying to help you, but for some reason that cut the deepest, but it was not because it was not good advice, not because it wasn't the right thing to do. It was because I personally hadn't grown up enough to view it for what it was, which is someone cares enough about me. And that's the important part. Like constructive criticism, another person's putting effort into you. If you weren't worth it, they wouldn't give it to you, period. Right?
That's a great point. And Jeff?
Yeah, I was going to say something. It's kind of I'll be a little less optimistic in the sense of maybe just being like truthful as far as like when you're, I guess, in the deep, dark, negative part of the imposter syndrome, when it comes to, people mentioned constructive criticism a handful of times, and you guys have mentioned it in an optimistic light, which is obviously the ideal. But I would also say, and obviously I'm speaking about me, I'm not talking about my friend. When you're in that perfectionism black hole, you won't hear constructive criticism because they'll say it and you're like, I know it wasn't perfect. I got it. I already knew that. And then that's where that negative feedback loop happens. Shaun said something about you're a negative. I can't remember. He said something to you, Chance, about it's a negative SME or something like that. I can't remember what he said.
Oh,
but
right. Like I'm a SME, but I'm trying to be a SME, but I'm not actually a SME.
Yeah. So when you're in that horse blinder negative perfectionism work, and that's where I think imposter syndrome is at its darkest, is you won't hear constructive criticism. You won't hear negative criticism. You won't hear anything because you've set yourself up to this fake standard that might not even be real or something that you can actually actualize. And that's where I think the clinical or chatty psychological breakdown has to happen, where you got to dig yourself out of that to acknowledge the imposter syndrome, acknowledge that it's actually everything that you're doing. Because a lot of people have talked about how sometimes this is actually a good thing. It drives us and gets us to good places. But the flip side of all this is those horse blinder negative perfectionism levels. Like I literally have a binder right here. This is horribly unhealthy. I have a binder right here. I took the time to write this out, print it out, and put it in the clear thing of this binder I have had since probably for over 15 years. And it says, if perfectionism can be achieved, it can be, if perfectionism can be perceived, it can be achieved. It's horribly unhealthy. Like that sets yourself up for constant failure and constant not listening to those helpful people, taking time out of the day to give you that constructive criticism. So I think that's what brings all us to this conversation today, into this month, is taking that one combat pause to realize this crap isn't working for me, or identifying it in a friend or a brother or a sister or whatever, and saying, finding that way, because that's, to me, this is really depressing. I don't mean it to be, but that's kind of the dark side of it, is those people will not listen. Those people, but ironically, become your top tier, sometimes your top tier operators, top tier brain surgeons, like sometimes top tier athletes. They're so that level that they're great in their one laser field, to use Shaun's metaphor, but they can't put that laser anywhere else or take criticism at all. And it's a weird duality in that they can be so perfect at this one thing, but it will cause complete destruction in everything else. And so that awareness, conversations like this, people that care about that other person, those are the things that need to break through that a little bit, because that's a lifetime of perfectionism that just can't be upheld.
You've got a binder called perfectionism, and that binder of perfectionism is freaking awesome in my books. Like I couldn't be a bigger fan right now. and here's why. Because at least you've got a direction on your trajectory, which is
True.
missing in a lot of people's lives. Now,
Well,
that
that's-
direction that you set up for yourself, that's just a guide. It doesn't mean that it is the end state that you absolutely have to achieve. It's a guide, right?
And that's the healthy, and I'm not just kissing Shaun's, but like that's the way it needs to be. I need to be better at, and other people should be better at. I'm just saying, I know I'm guilty of, and I definitely can smell my own kind. When anything less than that target is failure, this black and white duality of no gray area, that's the thing where, like, that I would say I'm guilty of. Like, if it doesn't go exactly the way I envision it, my little manifest this bullcrap in the universe stuff, it is a failure. And that's where that imposter syndrome and that perfectionism thing just create this downward spiral. Whereas Shaun has a good way to take that perfectionism and use it as a strength that has flexibility, versus a strength that has such rigidity. Anything other than perfect, it fractures.
Yeah, and the good news is that I'm actually not that bright, I guess, because if I figured it out, I think most people can. And so, and by
True.
figured it out, I don't mean I've figured out the whole thing. What I figured out is a tiny bit of the imposter syndrome in respect to me, and how I use it to drive me forward to what I will loosely call success in my own mind. The things that please me, the things that I'm amused by, the things that I want to accomplish. And so imposter syndrome with your binder, all of those failures, all of those non-perfect outcomes, I'm like, right now, bro, I'm just shrugging my shoulders thinking, freaking awesome. He's got a binder that's mega. He's had a bunch of failures. That's mega. I mean, we could wrap it up and you're like the king of the hill right now. You know what
I don't know. I
saying?
need you to just be my little shoulder angel, Shaun, and just walk around. I got to get you a little papoose on my back and just walk around with you like the guy on Alien.
You wouldn't
3.
want it, because then I'm talking in your other ear, so that wouldn't be good either.
Yeah, and
Then
really,
you would find that awkward.
if you want to have someone on your shoulder every day, Shaun would be the person to do it until you start not doing it right, and then you're gonna get told,
Gonna get chirped at
constructively.
I would clip that papoose, and
aren't we supposed to do that though? I mean, I want people to do it for me. Like if my imposter syndrome is raging out of control, whatever that means, then I expect my friends who know me and who are squared away to say, "Hey, bro, it's raging out of control. Dial it back. Check." And so it's my job to do the best that I can, but it's the job of the people around me to help me do the best job that I can. And again, with ChatGPT stating that in order to overcome imposter syndrome, you have to ... I just don't want to overcome it. I want to manage it. I want to shape it. I want to use it as a tool.
I think the biggest difference right now, Shaun, between what you're saying and perhaps some of the people that are feeling when it says to overcome it is that acceptance to say check and then dial it back.
Mhm.
And that's the big part, is that you've already accepted that at any point, if someone gives you constructive criticism, you're going to be like, Rod, oh yeah, good. Okay. And then enact on it. And a lot of people haven't learned that skill, or haven't reached, to Rob's point, haven't reached the level of maturity to actually say, oh man, these people actually care about me. I need to do better. That kind of
Well,
thing.
to Steve's point, I think part of the imposter syndrome and how to have these kind of conversations, it comes down to, well, what kind of a life have you lived, or who is it that you've been hanging around with, or how did you get raised up in a institution or a system? Like for Steve and I will say that, and I can't speak directly for Steve, but I think it's fair to assume that in the system that we were in, feedback was direct, concise, to the point, and it wasn't emotional. It wasn't delivered to you to make you upset or to make you happy. It was just, these are the things that happened. These are the things that we're going to address. This is the path forward. And so in my career, I never sat down in any room and had a kumbaya moment so strong that I felt like, wow, everything's going to be okay. What I did have a million of was this: Roger that, I'll get on with it. That's how I was taught. That was my education on this subject. And so there's lots of people out there that weren't privy or were not privileged enough to have lived the career that I lived in the military and got used to that form of direct, concise delivery. That's what I appreciate the most now. That's what I want everyone to do with me when I need feedback, but not everyone does. So, it's our job to figure out how constructive criticism is supposed to work for us, and if it feels too constructive, then figure out a way to get the other person to dial it back. You've got to learn yourself in order to improve yourself.
Yeah. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, guys, just with mute, bit of a rowdy puppy, but no, that's all
good.
well said. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I have a couple comments here. Anybody else got any thoughts on what we just went over? I wanted to hit.
No, the only thing I'll agree with you on there, Chance, is it is that acceptance. You've heard me say that before. But back to Jeff's point, that whole going into the black, right? Like that dark area. That acceptance is that, oh, I might be at the wrong hand of imposter syndrome. It's not the acceptance that, oh, I'm a huge imposter, right? And going and choosing to go into that area, right? And we can say that about all these mental health topics, right? Like going into the black is not where you want to be. And it starts with that first choice. Like, am I actually this thing, or is my mind playing a trick on me? Right.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple quick comments. Wanted to hit Jason. Good to see you. Alex, good to see you also. Glenn, always good to see you, brother. He says being rolled back. So coming from he got rolled back in a course load, saying being rolled back fed into my own imposter syndrome. What helped was acknowledging the truth behind it and going on the offensive, and slowly but surely working towards making those my strengths. And I think that's the same kind of mindset that you're talking about, Shaun, and Steve, is that and basically what we're all talking about. You have to acknowledge what's actually being said and go, okay, and then work on it.
Okay, so, and just because we've got Glenn up, I'm sure he won't mind me saying this. Yeah, it's our job to get right with the moment and figure out how to move forward. And sometimes we can't all by ourselves. Sometimes we need to lean on some friends. And Glenn may or may not have reached out to some of us and said, hey, boys, this is what's happening. How do I do it better? ... And so those conversations were had over several weeks. Glenn got to work, did it better. Now he's crushing. But I'm not sure he could have done that in an isolated room all by himself with no input. And so it was his job to reach out. And if he hadn't have reached out, it was our job to reach in. But either way, someone's got to reach and someone's got to sit down and get better at what they're trying to get better at. And once it's a combined effort, that can happen. So if you're struggling all by yourself, figure out a way to struggle with some support.
100%. I mean, that, and if at the very least, join us here, have these conversations with us. Like at the very least, if you don't think you have someone that you can reach out to talk to, this is why we're talking about it. Right. So you can comment, you can enjoy, you can get involved, or you can just watch and listen. And that's a step forward, at least. Any other thoughts on that? Good to go.
Yeah, Chance, could I weigh in with one thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know we have two of our brothers here from the U.S., and things might be a little different for them, but I'm sure you know, gentlemen, that Afghanistan was a huge event for the Canadian military. And my experience as a veteran pretty much stems from that, even though those tours were in like 2008 through 2010. But we started touching on like third parties playing into our own internal struggles with imposter syndrome. So I guess like an external influence. And one thing that I found, especially in the veteran community, I wanted to touch on being a veteran. It's easy to talk about being in this amazing team environment that is the special forces, but just when it got down to the Afghan veteran community in Canada, I think we do a really bad job of contributing to our brothers and sisters' mental health, especially with this imposter syndrome thing, where we had a term that was like inside the wire and outside the wire, and somehow your mission or your contribution to the country was different based on whether you were outside the wire or inside the wire. And that's even one of those things, I mentioned earlier that I was not an assaulter or an S1, but I was a medic. I meet a lot of Afghan vets who are like, as soon as they say they're an Afghan vet, they have to say whether they were inside or outside the wire. When I think that community needs to go collectively accepting of just the fact that you volunteered to go on that mission a whole bunch of times. This imposter syndrome is not just an internal thing. We can add to people's mental health by the things we say and do. And I think that the Afghan veteran community needs to get better at that. I never had a World War II vet compare his combat to my combat. And I don't understand why we do that to each other in the Afghan veteran community. And I think that we have to be aware of what we're saying to other people, disparaging their contributions or what they did as part of that mission. So.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that's a veteran community across the board. It's not just Canadian or American. I've talked to Brits, I've talked to Kiwis, I've talked to Aussies. Across the board, we need to do better at it. Any other thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. Steve, question for you, because I've seen this myself, but I know we're talking about imposter syndrome, but what would you, in a brief moment, state could improve things? Well, how would you improve things?
Well, first of all, just the concept of service, it even goes a little bit further back than that, where sometimes in that Afghan veteran community, we disparage other missions, which starts with, you didn't go to Afghanistan, you didn't go through what I went through, therefore your service is not the same as my service. I think it goes right back down to having the exact same respect for somebody who volunteers to serve the country. And I think that works with firefighters, cops, EMS. The fact that you're willing to serve is the important thing, not what happens during that service, because that's just part of being the cogs of history. It's just timing, and you are where you are when things happen. And I think it just needs to go right back to that general respect for contribution and willingness to serve.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why I push so hard on the veteran title is because it's all encompassing, right? Once you sign up and you complete basic training, doesn't matter what happens from there. You're a veteran. And that's the way it is. It doesn't matter whether you are a cook, whether you are a tier 1 assaulter, you signed up to serve the country and you did. In my mind, that's what I've thought for many, many years. Jeff, you had a thought?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a wonderful observation as far as we can bring all this imposter syndrome on ourselves. And I hadn't thought of it, and I completely agree about it, that outwardly there's this weird standard when it comes to, we're using the reference of like, oh, as a combat vet, I was in the wire, I was outside the wire, I was a radiology technician in the army, whatever. So there's all these outside people setting this weird standard. And I highly agree with that. Is like, we're hard enough on ourselves. So we need to not let that outside, the bad juju from outside setting up these weird standards bombard us. And then those people also need to have the self-awareness that they're feeding that same fire. And then I'll add to it is, I think it's safe to say the industry I went to after the military is pretty much the social experiment polar opposite of being in the military as far as everything. You name it, everything's the opposite. And I've experienced it, and I see it. It's a weird to add on to that comment of outside forces is, for some reason, there's this absurd standard of and it goes back to my little social media. There's this expectation, if you're not The Rock or Goggins or whatever, you're a failed SEAL or you're a failed actor or whatever, where there's this weird standard out there that if you're not number one, you must be a failure. Like, why is it this yes or no switch? And that outside stuff, whether it's in the veteran community, in the little Hollywood community bullshit, or at a business or whatever, there's this weird thing of because all we see are those successes, or all we hear about are the combat vets. We don't hear about the radiology technician. So for some reason that becomes this outward standard. And I completely love that point, that we need to, our own inner voice can go black just on its own. We don't need more help. And so we need to be aware of those outside forces that have this weird extreme yes or no success. It's like this ones and zeros. Apparently there's no in between, and hearing that and fighting it is huge. And I love that point to add to that.
You're either first or you're last.
Exactly. Yeah, the joke itself, it feeds that,
It really does.
It does, and I subscribe to that. You're either the winner or you're not. I do subscribe to that. And I've spoken about this in the past just recently, that one of the things I feel is going a little sideways in society right now is, instead of focusing on there's only one winner and there's a bunch of other people who didn't win, what we've done is flip-flopped it, and everyone's a winner. You stand on the start line, you've already won. Yes. You can stand on the start line and see your medals at the end of the 100-meter dash, and you're already mentally picking out one of the 20 medals that are on the table that all say first place for all the 20 people standing on the start line. That's the way it is. People have forgotten how to win. People have forgotten how to lose. We need to remember how to do that again. And if you place third out of 33 runners and you did your best, you're a freaking winner in my books, baby. But if you play third out of 33rd and you half-assed it, you're a loser in my books, baby. That's what I tell all my athletes. That's been my stance forever.
And
we need to learn how to win. We need to learn how to lose. We need to evaluate our win or loss based on how much we got after it, not after whatever your race number is that you come across the line. With that out of the way, I'll say this, that imposter syndrome is a thing that veterans face a lot of, I've found, because they come out of the military, and no matter how large and in charge they were in whatever role within the military, while they were in, they had confidence, they had skills, they had blah, blah, blah. They had all of the stuff to feel like they could take care of business to some degree. But once they step out, that first step onto the civilian sidewalk and look around and don't have anything to rely on, lean on to figure out that I deserve a seat at this table as of today, that's a really uncomfortable position. But I've said this to many a veteran, and I feel it's really important to say in this conversation, you've already got all the skills, all the tools, all the abilities to be a freaking astronaut if you want. You just got to work as hard as you worked in the past, and you'll become what you want to become. As a veteran, I was taught how to do literally anything I want in the world, become anything I wanted to be. Then it's my job to go do those things with the things that I was taught how to do. And if I let myself down, well, that's the imposter syndrome kicking in, baby. But I try not to let myself down. I try to stay focused, and I try to rely on the things that I was taught as a young soldier. Now, as a veteran, I'm implementing them and seeing success. So, for all the veterans out there who have just got out, who have been out for a while, who are thinking about getting out, don't sweat it. You'll be all right. Just trust in all the things that you were taught. And if you find yourself on day 2 standing on the sidewalk thinking, I don't belong here, I don't deserve a seat at the table, reach out to some of us. We'll help you out.
100%. Any other thoughts on that? Chad, you've been kind of quiet for a little while. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, it plays in real well with everything that we're talking about. You know, when I was in battalion, right, we create that hierarchy. You know, it's you got the airborne guys, and then you got the legs, right, and then now you got the airborne, and then you got the combat vet, and then you got the veterans. So we do it to ourselves, right? Because I hid from my service quite a bit, right? I never really talked about it. The fact that I burnt in on a night jump, right, and then got booted from battalion for being a turd, essentially, and then being a leg. You know, at that point, I was like, I'm done. I'm never going to get back to where I want to be. I'm not going to get to the tip of the spear, and just played the whole woe's me game for, 20 plus years. And I know there's millions of veterans, and that's why, the company's Mental Joe. It's for the GI Joes, and it's for the average Joes. It's for those average Joes that continually to fail, but they don't know, or they don't have the skill set or the emotional intelligence to say, stop. I had it in me at one time. What do I got to do to get this geared up? How do I get rid of this imposter system, or use it as a way to cattle prod you forward? And so being around gentlemen like yourselves and sitting back and listening to this, it's an education for me, right? Because now I can be like, okay, I see where these guys are driving. If I'm going to be part of this boat, I've got to level up my damn self, right? So there's a lot of that stuff that I personally hid from years, because I didn't want to talk about it, because I thought I was such a failure because I didn't hit that pinnacle that I wanted to hit, right?
And these conversations are really important. I've said this before on the podcast many times, but I do want to hit on it right now. Is the fact that my grandfather, World War II veteran, volunteered to go overseas, volunteered to be an engineer, did all the training, went to Europe, was working in Europe, rebuilding the railroads. Hugely important job to get supplies everywhere, right? If people aren't doing that, troops can't fight. So extremely important. He thought himself a coward for 70 plus years, right up until basically the day he died. He thought himself a coward because at one point during the war, somebody called for volunteers to head towards the front. He didn't put his hand up. That's it. That for that one action for 70 years. And I think that it goes into say that, like, it's very easy to let ourselves focus on those types of things and that type of mentality of just, as you said it, Chad, woe is me, right? I screwed up. And you can do it for your whole life if you wanted to. And it's not until you actually make a choice. It's not until you actually decide to, I need information. Somebody else has to talk. I need to reach out. I need to talk to somebody else about it. You can sit in that black hole. You can, or you can also not. Now, we're just about at time here. I do want to hit a couple things really quickly, and then I'll do some final thoughts. But thank you guys for the conversation. This has been fantastic. just awesome. Dr. C kicks back with imposter syndrome is on a continuum. Everyone has different degrees. Many times part of our inner criticism can stem from very critical parents as well. Jeff is right. Awareness of that voice is so important. Glenn kicks back in. Also 100%. I gave myself a 12-hour pity party. Sat with it and reached out to the Council of Elders, right? Each person/conversation helped reorient myself in the moment and the weeks that followed, right? Pity party. Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I mean, my granddad did it for 70 years, right? It can be a small little pity party of 5-10 minutes of like, oh man, that sucked. Okay. And on you go. Otherwise, it goes back to the continuum portion. And then the last one here, talking to horses. Jason, I didn't fit into many groups, so I created an adaptive process of acting like a chameleon. Like I found out that I could fake it really well in order to blend in where I felt completely out. I feel the same way, or I felt the same way for many years. That would be a whole nother conversation, so we're not going to get too deep in that one. I'm going to save that for later, and we're going to discuss it another time. Let's go down and get some final thoughts. Chad, I'm going to put you on the fire first. What do you got?
No, like I said earlier, I think it's great. I mean, from the social media aspect, I think you can really narrow in on who you need to follow and who you need to listen to grow yourself as an individual. And I think this collective live that you guys do daily is such a huge tool for those people that kind of plug into it to hear from different aspects of life and people that have been, tip of the spear to folks that have not served but still struggle with this as well, to your guys that have failed like me thousands and thousands of times and just kept doing it because we couldn't get out our own ways and thought processes. So again, I appreciate you guys more than because it holds me to a different standard. So appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go with kind of piggyback a little bit off what Shaun was saying. Is I think the best way, when he was talking about there's winners and losers, I think everything we talked about, there's a hybrid of all of this, is to take those things that make us perfectionists, that strive us to avoid complacency, that strive to make us better people, to avoid the mundane. I mean, if that's the life you want, you're happy with it, great. But if you're trying to achieve those things, finding that sweet spot of that self-awareness versus that self-deprecating downward spiral, imposter syndrome, self-talk, that's that sweet spot. That is, even as Shaun was talking, I was like, I need to do that better. I need to go. I've always been the, if you ain't first, you're last guy, which is fine. But I always translated that to failure. If I'm not first, I failed. Even if I put 120% in and got second, I'm like, I failed. And finding that sweet spot of like, not everybody gets a trophy. I agree with that. That creates complacency in all of society. So finding that sweet spot to be that perfectionist, be that person that avoids the mundane, and hybriding it to make a word up. And focusing on shoot for first, have a clear conscience if you don't make it, but you're not a failure and you're not an imposter if you didn't pull it off. And I think all of that has a foundation of self-awareness and having that honest talk with yourself about, are you using all these skills for good or evil?
I like it. Rob, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just sort of agree with all the points that are currently being made because I think they're perfect. I will tie it back just to those two comments that you last showed their Chance, right? So that idea of the pity party, it comes down to perspective, right? And a self-awareness of where you are in that phase. Like a pity party's fine up until the moment it becomes the most comfortable choice, right? And same with being a chameleon. Like there are a lot of benefits to be able to like roll with the punches and fit in with the crowd, as long as it doesn't turn into, the Dunning-Kruger of, oh, because I can roll with these guys because I can talk the talk does not, if I'm now the rocket surgeon when I'm really not, that also becomes a problem, right? So like perspective and self-awareness of how to regulate these things, and to all the entire panel's point, directing it towards positive growth and change for yourself, and not into some downward spiral of going into the black 1080 degree. Right.
I like it. Steve?
No, there's nothing to add to that. What those last three gentlemen just said. Just replay that over one more time so we can all get that wisdom again. Well said, guys.
All right. Shaun?
Yeah, I don't have anything more to add. It's been a really good conversation. I wish we had another hour to build it out some more, of course. To Steve's point, the last three comments were right on point, but I know if we had another hour, we would have a whole bunch more right on points. So don't think for a moment, anyone who's listening to this, that we've cracked this one out of the park with all of the solutions, because we haven't. But there's enough here today. If you take some time to think about it, maybe scribble a few notes down on a piece of paper, think about it a bit more. If you've got any questions or comments, shoot them to Chance. We can cover them in the future.
Absolutely.
Be happy to touch on this subject again.
Yeah, this month especially, because it is Men's Mental Health Month and we are diving into these things every day. Absolutely. If y'all got questions, send them my way. I can put them up and we can actually we can discuss them on the panel. I can't thank you guys enough, man. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think we hit a lot of solid, actionable things that people can take home in order to better themselves, better each other, and better the world around them. I think it's fantastic. So as we learn about imposter syndrome, we can then build our own self-image and we can grow into what we're capable of. So we'll see you all tomorrow here on The Collective. Chimo.
Chibo.